Welcome to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Our mission is to bring you discussions on a wide array of topics in the coaching world to grow players on and off the court. You can connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and also reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Now, here's your host, Coach Mike Hernandez.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining us here for another episode. As always, wherever it is you're listening from, whatever platform you're listening to us on, thank you guys so much for the support. Thank you for all of the kind messages, all of the emails, all the things on social media you sent, all the things you've sent personally to me. I always appreciate it. I always read all of them. Thank you. Keep those coming. Keep those topic suggestions coming, questions you have coming. They really do a great job helping formulate ideas with guests and formulate ideas for topics. And thank you again for checking this episode out. And we're going to talk about offense today. Our topic is going to be very much centered around the offensive side of the game, talking about generating offensive advantages, talking about running philosophically on offense, what creates the best advantages, what sort of actions and cuts and things of that nature kind of work best on offense, and also get a little bit into the girls' basketball game itself, which is something my guest is passionate about. As you guys know, I'm very passionate about as nearly a lifelong girls' basketball coach myself. So we're getting into offense, getting into the getting advantages on offense, talking a little bit about some defensive stuff that you might see and how to create advantages out of that, and a whole bunch more. So really excited to get into this with my guest, the head girls basketball coach at Peters Township. Very happy to be joined by Coach Steve Limberiou today. Coach, really appreciate you being able to take some time out of your schedule to come here and talk to us today. How we doing?
Good. Thanks so much for having me on, Coach.
Coach, let's go ahead and start with you and your basketball journey and your coaching journey. Where has this great game of basketball taken you, and ultimately, how did you end up at Peters Township?
Yeah. So first, I'll start with my playing career. So I played here locally in the Pittsburgh area at Upper St. Clair High School, and I played collegiately at Catholic University of America, referred to as CUA by many, which is a Division III program in the Washington, D.C. area. Very good program, had a lot of successful teams there. And I actually started my coaching journey on the boys' side back at Upper St. Clair. So I spent a year there working in different capacities, kind of 9 through the varsity team, and actually a couple of years off for job related. But when I returned to the Pittsburgh area, I actually started as on the girls' side as the JV and, well, I should say assisting all areas of the program at South Park High School, which is a smaller school in this area. I was 2 years as an assistant. And my final year there was as the head coach. After that, I have spent the past 2 seasons as the head coach at Peters Township High School, which just in PA terms is a large school. We'll call it that, which is where, like I said, I will be entering year 3 as the head coach this upcoming season.
Awesome. Fantastic. And I wanted to ask you about, as I kind of alluded to at the beginning. I know that's something that you're kind of passionate about in the general sense, and I'll kind of let you take this whatever direction you wish to with this question. Is the state of girls basketball at the high school level, and we're at an interesting point, I think personally, where for years as I've been doing this show, we've been talking a lot about the decline in girls basketball numbers, and specifically how a lot of programs maybe at the high school level aren't able to have lower level teams or JV teams, and just in relation to other sports, girls basketball seems to be declining a bit. But now we're also at this really interesting point where interest in the girls game, with everything that's happened in the college and this kind of resurgence a little bit of the WNBA, I think has also piqued a lot of interest in girls basketball. So let me ask you, Coach, about where do you kind of see the game of girls basketball at right now at the high school level? What could we as coaches maybe do to kind of increase involvement, keep the momentum going, and keep the excitement up in the girls game?
Yeah. So, I think the first thing that is interesting is how the Caitlin Clark effect will kind of cycle down and affect the high school level and, even into the grade school level. But, I think before that, at least the trend that we've seen here in the Pittsburgh area it's concerning. As far as numbers, I know a lot of schools in this area do not have JV teams. There's a coaching friend of mine who, coached in a smaller division here in the Western Pennsylvania region, and their JV team only played 14 games. We're allowed 22 maximum, and they struggled to find games, and I think that's something that's concerning. And I do have a few ideas or things that I think we can do to help grow the game. I think overarching, the first thing is the girls have to have fun when they're in the gym. And I know that, sounds like a simple concept to everyone listening, but I generally think the days of, coaching via force, almost authoritarian style are mostly over. And I think if that is kind of the way you carry your program, you're going to struggle with numbers. Just speaking from where I coach at Peters Township, uh, girls have options with their time, and if they don't feel that, that they're having fun doing this, or when they enter the gym, they don't feel good about where they're going, they have other options, and they'll head that direction. So I think you always have to remember, you have girls of different seriousness. You have girls who want to play in college. You have some who are just, playing for fun. But in general, every girl that walks through those doors needs to have fun every day. And that's something I work to remember, and really cultivate that feeling with the girls along with our coaching staff. I think another big thing is promoting flexibility with multi-sport athletes. This is really important, and I'll be interested to hear a little bit about how this affects you guys in Arizona. But here in the Pittsburgh region in general, I think we're very much moving towards a one sport year-round type of model, and I think that is hurting basketball, girls basketball, but I'm sure it's also hurting other sports as well. And I think there's a couple things we can do about that. I think the first one is promoting, I think it's giving parents knowledge that playing more than one sport is okay. I think that, it's another thing that sounds simple, but I think a lot of parents are being told that their, daughter or son needs to focus on one sport all year if they want to reach the next level. And I think there's actually a lot of evidence and studies out there that, playing multiple sports can help from an injury aspect, to keeping them healthy. I think playing multiple sports can also give our athletes a break mentally, from going through the same sport the entire year. And I also think you can develop skills across multiple sports that will benefit whatever that main sport is. So I think it's getting your girls to know that, but at the same time, making sure parents understand that. I think that's something that's really important. And I think the final thing, we joked a little bit about this before we started recording, is the shot clock. I think as far as girls basketball is concerned, I can't tell you how many games I have watched, over the past 3 or 4 years, where if a team has a lead with 4 to 5 minutes left, because we don't have a shot clock in Pennsylvania, essentially the game turns into holding the ball, and you will see multi-minute possessions. I don't think that's, one, fun for the fans to watch. I don't think there's any fans who would sign up to watch that. And two, I don't think it's fun for the girls. I don't think it's promoting, an environment where it's increasing their skill level. I definitely don't think it's getting them ready to play college basketball. And I generally just think it hurts the overall excitement of the game. So those are, the three things to me that stick out, that we can do to continue to promote the game of girls basketball. But at the same time, I'm certainly interested to see how Caitlin Clark and the increased numbers of the WNBA affect things over the next couple of years as well.
Yeah, the some of the points that you mentioned are definitely things that we face here, and I think one of the things that I know is particularly alarming to me that you mentioned is this pressure I feel that players have for specialization, and this idea that they have to dedicate all their time and put all their eggs into one basket, otherwise they're going to fall behind, other players, and I think that it's really unfair to kind of put one put all this pressure on our girls to have to like make that choice and kind of feel like they have to take themselves away from a sport. And two, I also like you kind of mentioned too, I think putting that sort of pressure on players definitely removes some of the fun and some of the enjoyment out of playing a sport when they feel like this is what they have to do and they have to dedicate all this time to it and they can't have any other break to go do anything else. I mean, I know for me personally, I can't tell you how many girls I have who are multi-sport athletes, who some of them basketball is their main sport and some of them have a different sport that's their main sport, but they use that other sport as almost like one that they can have more fun in, and one that they take it seriously and they try hard on it, but they don't feel the same sort of expectation or the same weight of pressure to have to perform that they do in, whatever their quote unquote main sport is. And I just think that as coaches, we have to do a better job of encouraging our players to do other sports, to learn from other coaches, learn in other sports, and that it's okay that they're not going to fall behind if they go play another sport for a few months. They'll come back to you refreshed, recharged, and hopefully even more excited to play because they've had a chance to miss it a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think this is something that, talking with other coaches that, I think the promotion, of sharing ideas like this or things we can do to grow the game, and promote being flexible as far as multiple sports is something that's really important going forward. And, hey, I'm certainly open to other ideas from other people as well. And anything we can do to promote this, I think is important.
Yeah, no, 100% agreed. And I think that, just to kind of put a bow on that thought, I think as coaches, we hopefully are in a position, hopefully all of you who are listening are in a position where we are encouraging one another and that we are promoting and happy when our players do other sports and are supportive of one another. I've heard of, unfortunately, too many stories of coaches you can tell are kind of try and pit coaches against players or pit players against coaches and try to, you know, discourage players from playing for certain coaches or doing certain sports. And I think once that starts happening, that gets really bad for the whole school culture and things of that nature. And it's interesting to me how many athletes who are super successful and play at a really high level are also players who played multiple sports too. I feel like there's a lot of trends that show that multi-sport athletes produce like real high level athletes once they do decide to specialize in something.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I was actually reading a recent article about Caitlin Clark.
Hmm.
And I know her parents mentioned that growing up, she did everything.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
did
yeah.
not push her specifically to play basketball. Obviously, that became her choice over time. But, I think in the article, it just mentioned a couple interesting things about how they thought that was, very beneficial to her basketball career, being exposed to all these different sports and how it really aided her development. And, just something that I think is a really good lesson in general for all the parents out there.
Yes, absolutely. That's great. Yeah, those highest level athletes are playing other sports, learning from other sports, and then ultimately, when they have that much skill level, can choose the one that they love the most, and that's what they can go to. So no, that's great. Coach, let's talk a little bit here on the offensive side of the game and kind of this idea and topic of generating advantages on offense. And let's start from a conceptual level, Coach, about what do you believe in offensively as a coach? What have you found over the years has worked for you offensively? Why do you believe in what it is that you run? Why does it work for you, and what do you get out of running it?
Yeah, it's, of course, I'm sure this answer will take me in a couple different directions. I
All
think
good.
the first thing that we do that may be, different from some other programs is we, essentially will rebuild our offense on a year-to-year basis. My first year coaching at South Park, we probably took 30 to 35 threes a game. Played at an extremely fast pace. We didn't have a girl above, I would say, 5'9". And we wanted to play their strengths as much as possible. Whereas, my first year at Peters Township, we were at a much slower pace. We had more size on the court. So I generally think we will rebuild our offense on a year-to-year basis. We are not a program that is, and I'm sure you'll see this, we're not a flex program or we're not a dribble drive program where we are trying to stick our pieces, into whatever our offense would be, no matter what the
Hmm.
player talent level is, or, what our girls do best. So I think that's the first important distinction to put out. I think also every year I really consciously try to sit down and evaluate what our offensive strengths are from each individual player. Like I said, and that kind of ties into the previous thing I said as well, but we want to run actions, as far as our sets and really even how we get into transition that's based on what our girls do well. So I really think it's important to think about that, and I consciously try to do that every single season. At the same time, we're always trying to put in a style that will utilize what those girls do best. For example, we will run, the point series, kind of some of the elements that the Denver Nuggets run, because we have a four, who's capable of handling the ball. We have 2-6-3 girls, right? So we'll run a lot of post isolation type stuff. In general, I like to put in 8 to 10 actions that fit our personnel really well. So I don't think this is not, the collegiate level where we're going to run, 150 things or something, so I do think there's a level of simplicity that you have to have. But we like to keep it roughly to 8 to 10 actions that really fit what our girls do well. The next step, that we try to follow is adding in some layering to those sets. So, for example, these sets, we're going to run similar actions basically out of different alignments. So, for example, if we were in, a horns alignment, we could still run a post duck in set. Similar, we could go, a 4 out, 1 in type alignment, but we're still capable of running a duck in, type action. So we add in some layering. So, for example, of those 8 to 10 actions, we could install 2 or 3 plays or sets that go with each of like the formations. I think the next important thing, and this is something that we're, very much still a work in progress, is generating actions out of neutral. And what I mean by neutral is when there is no advantage, right? The defense is in front of the offense. You don't have a driving angle, and it's giving your team, or girls in our case, some actions to run that aren't, it's not a set, but just movement that gets them moving and will help them generate advantages. Just a couple examples, gets and DHOs and split action, where that's not a set, we're not going to call that. But when we're stuck, or let's say a set breaks down, we can get into an action which will hopefully generate an advantage. And like I said, definitely not something that we're comfortable with yet. That's something we're still working on. But I think that's really important, to augment the sets with actions in a way to give the girls a way to move that's not scripted. And I think that's really important because, I think, as when you face the teams who will really scout you and know what you do well, you have to be able to do some things that are not scripted, girl moving from spot to spot, that can cause defensive problems. And I think all the best teams do that. I think the next thing is just, once you have the advantage, right? So you've generated it, it's making quick decisions. This is something we talk about all the time, is what we call it 0.5 seconds, right? So anytime we have an advantage and you catch the ball, we want to make a decision in 0.5 seconds. I think the one thing that can really allow defenses to get back into the picture is holding the ball, right? It allows help side to move over. It allows on-ball defense to improve. So I think catching it and making quick decisions, whether that be shoot, pass, drive, whatever it is, we just want to do it quickly. So in a nutshell there, we definitely have some sets. We try to add some layering, and then at the same time incorporating some actions that we can run when the defense is at neutral. We try to have a blend of those areas, and hopefully that'll generate for some success for us this upcoming season.
So I'm gonna work backwards a little bit with some of the things that you said, because I want to pick your brain on a few of these, and I want to start with the quick decisions. And I agree. I think when you have that defense, especially, I mean, we all know, those listening, when the defense is moving, when the defense is off balance, and defense is switching, the more the defense moves, the more advantages, and then the more likely there's going to be a hole in that defense, or a slip up in communication, or rotation, or whatever, and that's when the advantage could be created. But you mentioned about that idea of players being able to make quick decisions. And I wanted to ask about the process of teaching that. Is that something that could be taught and drilled within, like something you put into a practice, or something that you run a drill for, or something that you can do a small sided game for? Or is this something that has to be kind of learned, trial by fire, through the process of playing and competing and breaking down film and learning what works? And in your opinion, what kind of goes into increasing those players' ability to make those quick decisions?
Yeah, I think you hit on one of the topics. It's the small-sided games, which we use a lot. What one that we do. So we'll have 5 players on offense, 4 on defense, right? So you're when the ball gets swung out from the middle of the paint, you're automatically in an advantage. And we set a rule, or you could call as a constraint, that you have to move the ball within that 0.5 seconds. So it just gets you in the mindset of quickly making decisions right away from the jump. You could run the same structure in a 3-on-2 setting, where you have 2 defensive players, 3 on offense, catch it and make a quick decision, or as we call it, a turnover, and the next team would be on. So I think doing that through the small-sided games is certainly a way to improve. I think the other thing that we really work on, and I'm sure I'll touch this later, is film study. I think it's important to show your players what it looks like when it's done correctly and how that can cause problems to defense. But at the same time, I think it's important to show when the ball is held, how much easier it is to defend. So, I think those two areas, as far as incorporating that into small sided games and at the same time seeing what you look like on film, are very important to increasing the decision making capabilities of each player.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I have tried before to, um, kind of maybe over explain or try and to do certain things where I feel like, okay, this particular drill or someone, I'll put this specific situation up and they'll learn to make a decision out of it. But to your point, I think for them to compete in a live situation in that small sided game or to see it on film, I think has been best because forces players to have to make tons of different decisions because every small-sided game or every sort of competition always has a little bit of a different wrinkle to it, and no two situations are the same. And then, like you said, on film, I think for players to see what they're doing, right? It's one thing for me as a coach to tell them what they're doing, and maybe they'll believe me, maybe they won't. But for them to actually see it, I've seen the light bulb go off in players' heads once they actually see what they're doing on film.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something, maybe we as a program do more maybe than other programs locally. I mean, we will even watch
Hmm.
film in the off season, whether that
Oh
be in
yeah.
the fall, just we try to film some of our workouts, just so we can get in the habit of, learning from our mistakes and making those quick decisions.
So one of the things you also mentioned, Coach, was about that idea of how your offense is going to change based on player skill and maximizing what it is that they do well. And I know this could maybe seem a little bit obvious, but when you're doing those evaluations, when you're looking at your players, especially when you have players who have multiple skill sets or they have strengths in many different areas, what goes into kind of looking at a player individually and kind of looking at all of the players and kind of figuring out how to maximize what it is that they do well? Is that a process that's relatively simple for you? Is there a lot of thought that goes into it? How do you kind of make sure that year to year you're evaluating what they're doing well and then being able to kind of put them within the right place where they complement one another?
Yeah, I think the first thing is there's definitely some trial and error involved in this.
Oh
We
yeah, I'm sure.
especially a lot of the games that we will play in the summertime, we will try a new idea out there to see what it looks like. But you better have some flexibility to admit that if it doesn't look right, you better head in a different direction. So we will use a lot of our practice time as well, trying some new things to see how it fits with the group, just so we have an idea when the fall, late fall, early winter rolls around, that hey, I don't think this idea looked very good, or hey, this looked really good. So I also think it's important to watch your players in other settings, and this is something we really do. But I try to watch a lot of AAU games. Our girls are all, for the most part, very involved in AAU, and I think you can see what they do well in an AAU setting. Maybe there's an action you pick up that one of their AAU teams run that that
Mm.
allows them to have success. So I think it's seeing them in other settings as well, taking some things from AAU that they do well and blending them into what you do. So I definitely think it's a trial and error process every year, but those are just some ways that I found that help us put things together as we head into the fall.
And to your point that using that off season, using that summer to try out all the different things, right? I use the summer for, I'll put players in positions that they would maybe normally I would never think that they would be in, but I'd rather see what that looks like in the summer, and then maybe something pops in my mind. Maybe a player shows something that I didn't know that they had, or all of a sudden I'm like, oh, wait a minute, I put this player here, all of a sudden like it opens up the floor here, and I never really thought about it that way. And I think that's kind of a really good point that when you have those opportunities to put players outside of, what you normally would think that they would be in or what you normally think what their strength is in, it could be eye-opening, could show you something that you never really would have thought of if you hadn't ever put them in that position.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're, from our perspective, I think sometimes in other people's, well, there's maybe too much of an emphasis on winning in the summer league.
Mm. Yeah,
Like
yes, I would wholeheartedly agree. From going
and
through this summer, I've seen play. Not to cut you off, but I've seen coaches who act like they're in the national championship game in mid-June coaching, and it's kind of funny.
yeah,
Continue, coach.
No, I mean, and I'm not saying you want to lose. I mean, we just came from
Oh
a
no.
very competitive tournament at Best of Maryland, and of course, you want to win, but at the same time, you need to be playing your best basketball in whatever state you're in, whether that be early March or late March, not on June 1st. So I think I think it's important to remember that, and I know sometimes as coaches it's easy to get carried away in individual results of each game, but I think it's a process of getting ready for the season and still being cognizant of the fact that you're not going to be playing your best basketball in June, right? So I think that's something for all of us to remember, and I'm sure I'm guilty of it at times as well.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, when you get in the heat of it, right? When you're coaching, right? So it's like you get locked into the game itself, and of course you want to win and everything like that. But I've done that where even this June, I've put players had them bring up the ball that I would never think that they would ever bring up the ball. And some of them, I'm like, no, you're never bringing up the ball again. But some of them, I'm like, oh, if I need to in a pinch, maybe I could have you, bring up the ball or flash you in the high post or things like that. And at the end of the day, it's like you said, right? What am I doing to make sure that we're in a situation come February and March to be successful? And the off season's my time to try those things out, not in the middle of January. So yeah, 100% agree with that. Um, so. I want to ask you about this. Kind of blends a couple questions together, but I think it works out pretty well. Is the idea of training your players to find advantages to get good looks. I wanted to ask you about what kind of goes into your let's start with your practice planning. So when you're thinking about what you're putting into your practices that are going to kind of intentionally put players in those situations where they're making decisions, they're reading and building up their basketball IQ, building up their kind of offensive, mental, and physical skill set. What kind of goes into the drills or exercises, or the things that you're putting in that practice plan for your players to work on those things?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think the first thing is kind of the shift I've had from a coaching perspective, even in the past 4 years. It's that in practice, we will start our practices typically with, 15 to 20 minutes of skill work before we get into team stuff. And I think the first part of that is I have, for the most part, moved away from doing stuff one on zero. Whether that be just ball handling drills with two balls or doing stuff with cones on air. I've really tried to move away from that as much as possible and try to incorporate as much game like action as I possibly can put in. And I think one on one is obviously beneficial. I think 2-on-2 is beneficial. We talked about the advantage of the 3-on-2, 2-on-1 type of stuff. But I think this is a coaching shift that I've made and something that I've found useful. It's the more you can put your players in game like situations and the less you can do, pounding two balls as fast as you can. I think that's better for players' development. I really do. And I think, and this kind of goes into why I've just moved away from the, use of cones, dribbling at cones and making a crossover at the cone, because that ultimately, that players are not going to run into situations like that where it's scripted. Oh, I'm going to walk up to, the key. I'm going to make a crossover every time. I'm going to finish with my right hand every time. In reality, that doesn't happen very often, right? There's a help side defender who steps in there, or someone cuts off your right hand and you have to get back to your left hand. So I think adding variability with defenders is really important and something that I've tried to do a lot of. Again, definitely a work in progress and kind of incorporating some of these drills, but I've just found that your players' IQ will increase if you can give them game-like situations with defenders as opposed to just doing things on air. So I think that's really important and a really a beneficial way to improve your team's basketball IQ.
And I've talked about this with a couple guests, and I'm curious your thoughts on this as well. That I believe that by doing that, you're going to also have to, live with as a coach that your practices are going to be messy. There's going to be mistakes. They're not going to maybe be the most aesthetically pleasing. And I'm curious if that's kind of how your practices are. Are there, a lot of mistakes? Does it kind of look a little bit messy when players are, maybe causing, some mistakes or making some turnovers, taking some bad shots, not making good reads? How kind of messy do those practices get? And is that something that you embrace?
Yeah, it definitely does. I think the less scripted the environment is that you're playing in, naturally, the more mistakes and kind of messiness like you talked about that you'll see. And I think you need to be okay with that, because in many ways, that's what the games are. There are not two ball dribbling drills in the game, where you can, really get used to it. And I'm not saying there's no place for that in basketball development, but I think, like I said, as much as we can replicate a game, the better. And oftentimes the games are messy. There are turnovers. The girls and boys don't make the right reads sometimes. So I think you have to accept that, especially, as you transition more into a model of using live defense in all of your drills. I think you have to be okay with those mistakes, and almost like relinquish control a little bit, that it's not all going to be scripted and it's going to be perfect. And just be okay with that and know that over time it's going to make your players better.
So player makes a mistake in practice. They're maybe they force up a bad shot. There's a turnover. Something happens where clearly there was a read that was not correct. As a coach, what is your process from there? How do you go about explaining it, or do you stop things? Well, what goes on after that mistake gets made?
Yeah, I definitely utilize, recreation, right? So if there's a mistake that's obvious, we will try to take our players back to that point, set them up, and say, hey, instead of making pass X, maybe pass Y was open to the corner, and showing them and almost playing live from that situation. I definitely think that's something that I found to be beneficial. But at the same time, I don't think as a coach you want to get into the standpoint of stopping every drill and every rep to teach. I think there's a blend there, but there's also a mix that the girls have to learn to figure it out on their own. And I think sometimes that comes from the leadership on your team, telling them and working through the girls who are maybe more experienced. But at the same time, it's learning through failure sometimes, and I don't think every rep needs a coach stepping in. One, your practices will take a long time. And two, I think you can get caught, spent a lot of time hearing your own voice in practice, as opposed to the girls actually learning. So I think it's about finding that balance. I'll try to come in and, correct whatever the issue was as quickly as possible. But at the same time, I really want to avoid sermons that are a minute long, where you're really trying to like catalog this situation. So I think it's a balance about knowing when to step in. But at the same time, I think your players also have to learn to kind of self-adjust on their own as well.
Yeah, I've fallen into that trap of over talking, over explaining, and before you know it, I feel like at least a third of our practice was just me talking to them, and I was like, that wasn't a good practice. All they did was listen. They didn't even do anything, and all I got out of it was kind of a sore throat because I talked so much.
Right.
Talk about film. Film is definitely also a great tool for players to kind of find those offensive advantages. Great teaching tool. Talk about how you use film and where that kind of plays into helping your players kind of understand what they should be looking for offensively.
Yeah, we really utilize film a lot, probably more than the average high school team. If I had to guess, we will probably watch film every day. That's not a game day. I think it's important that those sessions don't become over 20 minutes. We really try to keep it under 20 minutes. I think if you get above that, you occasionally run into attention span issues. And I just think that this generation, the faster and quicker you can give information and not, overload them with these long sessions, the better. At least that's what I found. Um, but for each game, we're trying to give our girls examples of how other teams defend things that are similar to what we do. So, for example, if we have two post players and we see a team that they've played has two post players, how did they defend them? What are some similar actions that this team ran that we ran? Just using high low hypothetically, showing our girls that, hey, this is how they defended a similar team to us. We can expect similar coverages. I think that's especially important early in the year. I think as the year goes on and you see teams for a second time, we really, really heavily will go through the film of how we were defended the first time, how our certain actions were defended, in general, what was their defensive game plan, and getting our girls to understand what they're trying to take away and how they're trying to force us to play is really important and something we spend a lot of time on. So for, like I used high low as a hypothetical example, we ran it this way. The team we played guarded it this way. We can expect to see that defense again. We need to add in a counter or a different way to attack this defense. based on how we regard it. So we really try to give the girls examples from similar teams or similar girls that'll be guarding them, that'll get them prepared to play as much as possible.
And it's interesting that you kind of mentioned that about having quick film sessions because it's harder I think than it looks because I think as coaches there's so much that we want to say, there's so much that we want to like teach and explain and have our girls know that 20 minutes goes by pretty quick. And so I'm imagining that for you to try and keep those sessions really short, that there must be some very specific things that you're choosing to fixate on or choosing to focus on, and that it's something that as a coach you have to put a lot of like pre-work and preparation in so that you're getting the absolute most you can out of that 20 minutes because you don't want to, like you said, kind of lose players' attention span or anything like that. So I imagine for you it's a very curated, very focused 20 minutes of things that you really want your players to get out of it.
Yeah, it is. And we really try to limit our clips, like each individual clip that we watch, to no more than 10 seconds.
Hmm.
I think sometimes if they're sitting through full possessions, it's like, well, am I watching the full game or am I actually watching, film? So we really try to keep things down. And at the same time, I think just like on the court, I don't want to overtalk. And
Hmm.
I think our assistants agree. I think the girls want to see it. We will, of course, ask for their input, and sometimes we'll ask what they were thinking in a certain situation or how they think we can best run something. But at the same time, I don't want to turn our film sessions into watch a 10-second clip, coach talks for a minute and a half, watch another 10-second clip, coach talks. Because eventually, if you're spending that much time talking of it, their attention span's going to start to move away. And
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
think I just think that that's important, but just something I found useful. We really try to keep those clips to 10 seconds to keep them as focused as possible.
Yeah, no, 100%, 100%. I think that, kind of in out, kind of use that quick model there. It's kind of funny. It's like using the fact that, our players are looking at things on TikTok or Instagram stories and stuff that's kind of in and out. It's like you almost have to kind of capture that length of time as well, trying to match that sort of same attention span. It's kind of funny, but it actually is kind of true. That's what you kind of need to do to hold them.
Yeah. And I think it's, kind of larger point. Like, I just think you have to meet this generation where they are,
Yep.
not necessarily what I was or well, my parents were, when they played. I really think you need to meet them with what they are. And, I think that faster is better in
Hmm.
many ways with this
No,
generation.
I agree. So let's talk about what you see, knowing that every team's going to be a little bit different that you go up against. So I'll ask this in kind of general terms. What do you see a lot of defensively thrown at you, and what do you kind of like to emphasize in your offense? I know you talked about how it's not one set particular action or robotic actions. You got multiple things that you'll kind of go into or multiple sets that you'll go into. So let's start by talking about what do you kind of see often defensively thrown your way?
Yeah, so I think this is it's kind of two parts in many ways.
Hmm.
One, we're very unorthodox because we start two girls who are 6'3", which is
Yes.
a blessing. There
The
there are
girls'
very
side, yeah, for sure.
very few girls high school programs in the country that are doing that. I think early in the season last year we saw doubles on post touches immediately, no matter either one of them, right? And I think it took us some time, a little bit, to adjust, knowing that post touches were going to be doubled, really, whether it was either of them. So that was kind of the first, I would say, half of the season. I think in the second half of the year, there was a turning point. We played a local rival. They watched a lot of film, and they essentially went to the off coverage on our five. So, we have a true five who's, primarily will spend most of her time in the post. And they basically went with the coverage of sagging off of her, clogging driving lanes, helping on our four, who's an extremely talented player. And I think that the model that they put in was then used the rest of the season.
Hmm.
And this team has really good coaches. We knew they watched a lot of film, but I think like I said, there was a shift in the second half of the year with the teams you see more who will watch more film on you, that was kind of copied by the rest of the teams in our section the rest of the year. So in general, we needed to come up with counters that would get that five moving a bit more and kind of utilizing her as opposed to simply, just standing in the dunker spot or, just this repetitive action. So like I said, they're both back this year. I think that's something that we're definitely working on. I definitely anticipate to see this defensive coverage a lot. And I think it's something that we need to have a good plan for, and something that we certainly talked a lot about this offseason, and that we need to be prepared for as we go into next year.
So when you're thinking about that sort of situation where you even I'll tweak this question just a little bit as I'm thinking about it. You'll have those situations where teams are going to try and take away the best player, right? They'll look at, okay, this
Yep.
is the one who's the biggest threat offensively, whether throw box and one, do something like that to try and make somebody else kind of beat you. When you know you're in a situation like that where they're going to double, they're going to do everything they can to take out one particular person, they'll zero in on somebody. What does that then kind of lead to you making sure that you're doing offensively for your other players, or that you're looking to kind of incorporate that player who's going to maybe be, double teamed, triple teamed, or, run that box and one against? How do you kind of conceptually think about getting advantages and getting what you want when they zero in on somebody, or maybe even two players in particular?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things. One, when you see that type of defense, we want to get that person involved in screening action as much as
Mm-hmm.
possible. Because that the girl that is guarding her is not helping. So right away, when you have a boy or girl who's like that, we try to get them involved in screening right away. One thing we found that's successful is pick and roll stuff. It's if the girl that is guarding her is not going to give any help at all, you almost immediately are going to generate an advantage on a pick and roll action. And like I said, that sounds simplistic, but we had a lot of success with that last year. I think the other thing we found is using that person as a decoy more, whereas, hey, we can get them a touch, but we're almost planning for the double team, and then we're going to play out of the double team. So for example, we would throw the ball inside. We knew a double was going to come. We would set a rip screen, back screen on the weak side to generate an open look, where it's almost like, hey, please come and double her, right? We've kind of
Mm-hmm.
seen how you're going to respond to us making this action, throwing the ball into the post. So once that happens, we're going to screen away and generate advantages. So, I'm lucky. The rest of the girls we have are also very talented, where it's very hard to just fully focus your resources on one girl. But I think you have to have a plan ready to go when other teams do that to your best player, where it's like, hey, we're prepared for this, and we have counters that we think are going to generate an advantage and lead to efficiency for us as well.
And do you see, just out of curiosity, I'm always curious when I get to talk offense with different coaches around the country, how much man do you see? Is that something that you see a lot of? Is it primary lots of different like zones or matchup zones? Do you see a lot of straight up man at all out in the Pennsylvania area?
Yeah, we saw almost exclusively man. There, we really didn't see much, junk defense at all. We didn't see a box and one. You will see an occasional zone. We have two or three girls who are shooting the three near 40%. So it's hard
Shoot
to
out of it,
play,
yeah.
to play zone against us. We basically saw a lot of man and a lot of, kind of that off coverage on our five, clogging, almost willing to give up, the mid range jump shot, um, to really clog the lane, make it hard to drive, and also make it hard on our top player to score. That's really what we saw the majority of the time.
I think that's really interesting. I see so much zone here in Arizona. I see tons of 1-3-1. I see way more 2-3 than I ever expect to see, and very very little in man. And so it's interesting to kind of see. I don't know if that's a regional thing. I don't know if that's just based on the level in particular that you're at, where you have players that will shoot their way out of a zone or cut their way out of a zone. But that's really fascinating how you have so much man being played here, at least from what I see here, a lot more on the zone side of things.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I'm sure next year a lot of people try to go zone against us, as a counter. But no, I just generally think this area is like a almost like a toughness man to man type area.
Yeah,
Like
mano a mano
that's
type
at
thing.
least, yeah, that's at least what we see in our area here. But I think there's definitely a place for zone, and I think that's, I know it's not a defensive podcast, but I think that's something we can almost think about more next season, is just kind of having that flexibility, so you're not
Mhm.
stuck into doing one thing if it's not going well.
One of the hardest things, Coach, I know that, it's even something that I still am never satisfied with. I don't know if a lot of coaches are ever truly satisfied with, but is off-ball movement and making sure that players are putting themselves in a position to create an advantage when they don't have the ball in their hand. And I wanted to ask you about what goes into your sets, or what goes into your teaching points to make sure that players understand that when they're moving without the ball, they're still putting themselves in a position to create an advantage and create a look that's going to benefit the team.
Yeah, I think this is so important, and this is one of those topics that we are very much still a work on progress on, and as far as cutting without the ball.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
I think it's so important. We have tried to teach a few general principles, that we're still working on. I think the first one is any baseline drive, we cut the opposite slot, or the 45 slot, some people will call it, to the rim as much as possible. Like we want that to be one of the things in our offense. That's an automatic go-to. Any baseline drive, opposite 45 cuts. I think in general you'll see a lot of success with that, because the natural tendency is for that defender to turn their head and try to get involved in the baseline drive. So
Mm.
I think you'll see a lot of success with that. The other thing is, from a cutting standpoint, that we're trying to put in right now, is any drive from the slot. So the weak side corner and the weak, the opposite side 45, you could either cut from the baseline to the rim, or that corner can step up and set a flare screen for the 45 to the corner. I think these are, it's just kind of a general template you can use as far as spacing and cutting, to avoid the weak side of your sets and offense to be staring. Like
Yeah.
I think at the NBA and the pro level, like, I was watching the Celtics before we got on tonight, like they spend a lot of time with, the opposite side people standing and watching. And that's great when you have, guys who are, everyone out there is just shooting the three at 40%, and you can do that. But I think at the high school level, you got to generate some movement away from the ball. And and if we're being honest, a lot of sets are 3-man sets, like out of horns or out of zoom action. So you have to create something for those other two players who are typically on the weak side, to move and to give them a template to cut without the ball to still be effective, and avoid just having them being spectators where they're watching. So I think that's something that we're very much working to improve, and something that we're going to really emphasize. But I think cutting and scoring at the rim is extremely important. And I think that's generally something all coaches can agree on.
And with that is because I completely agree. I think that for my players, they're definitely, we're in that process too of kind of learning just uh, effective cutting, effective movement. The other thing too with that, Coach, is I think spacing, and spacing, I know, is something that has been a big point of emphasis for me and the girls that I have this year, is keeping the spacing on offense. Is that something that you think can be taught, or is that really something that, like, through experience, through the small-sided games and through the film study that you watch, kind of players kind of naturally get a sense of? Or do you feel that you have to intentionally put things in place to kind of help players understand the concept of why spacing is so important in creating an effective offensive look?
Yeah, I think from our standpoint, that's definitely something that we have to emphasize, that maybe doesn't come natural. Like again, we are in a situation where we have two girls typically on the court who are capable of playing in the post, but at the same time, we don't want them there at the same time. So
Yeah.
I think that is a challenge. And I think generally something that's important is having that true five be able to spend time on the perimeter and generate some advantages, whether that be dribble handoffs, which I think is extremely effective, because the girl who's guarding her is going to be sagging off, flare screens, being able to set screens for curls, getting, even though this girl may be most comfortable working out of the post. I think if your true fives are comfortable spending time on the perimeter, and there'd be screening and just making a couple dribbles into a DHO to create an advantage, I think that's something that's really important. Because the fact of the matter is if you put two girls in the post, your spacing is going to be problematic oftentimes. It's just going to really clog up that lane. So I think that's, a unique challenge for us is learning that kind of that spacing where we have two girls who are capable of playing down there, but at the same time, we still want to be in that 4 out, one in type of setting more often and getting our five comfortable spending time out there. I think that's something we're really working on, just so we're more comfortable when we see these type of drop coverages off the five. So still
And
a work in progress.
well, I think also that it leads to kind of an interesting point about the idea of the players, those couple that you mentioned in particular, with the skill set and the strengths that they have, that depending on where they catch the ball and depending on the situation that they find themselves, them having the ball in a certain situation may in and of itself be that offensive advantage, and teaching players that idea of like, hey, you catch the ball in this area in the low post, like this is it, this is where you make your move, and this is going to be the best look that we can get. And I'm curious because that's a unique, such a unique position, I think, for you, and a great position that you kind of find yourself in, about where, if at all, do those conversations take place with some of those couple really talented girls that you have, where it's basically like, look, if you see this and you're in this position offensively, this in and of itself is an advantage. What if at all do those conversations kind of look like with those particular players?
Yeah, I think the first thing is recognizing who's guarding you, and I think the first thing, I mean, if we're catching the ball, with our posts within 5 feet, we're trying to score, and if that double's not coming, that to them is an automatic. I'm trying to make a post move, or I'm trying to finish at the rim, So I think being cognizant of who's guarding you is step one in that process. Typically, at the high school level, if you're a girl who's 6'3", you're going to have height advantage, right? This is not
It
the college
typically
where
get advantages. Yeah.
yeah, it's no ways you get to the college level where everyone has that kind of size. But I think that first thing is knowing who's guarding you, and I think that kind of works on the perimeter as well. If we feel with teams that switch a lot, right? If you're running action where the opposing team's switching, and you get an advantage where you get a slower or post defender on you, recognizing that and attacking right away is really important. So, and I think a lot of that is augmented by the film room, like we've talked about, seeing situations like, hey, we run a pick and roll. This team is going to switch. That switch going to generate an advantage. So, you're going to dive to the rim. We're going to look if they, the big stays on you. Hey, you're going to drive and attack the rim. So I think using film to kind of show them to exploit those matchups is important. But in general, I think every player has spots, or certain areas on the court where it's like, hey, I catch it here. I'm comfortable playing out of the mid post. I'm attacking, right? I'm catching the ball in my zone. I'm gonna make a play from here. And it's about getting your girls to really understand that and being confident in attacking those favorable matchups.
Yeah, you mentioned that just as part right now, and it just got me instantly thinking about, a particular player of mine this year, where one of the things that we've been really focusing on this summer and this off season with her is that not hesitating. She was a player who before would, she would just have that split second of hesitation where, she was ready. She was locked and loaded in a position, but she would just hesitate that split second, and by then that advantage was gone. And just, working through those players like you mentioned, who have those spots like you mentioned, where it's like, hey, when you get it here, like, you shouldn't be hesitating at all. Like, you not taking that shot, or you not going in, or making that post move, that's being selfish. Like, you need to take advantage of all this skill set that you have and all the time you've put in on this particular, shot or this particular area, and make it happen during a game. And it's interesting that even something like that, where a player, doing that little bit of hesitation, could be something that takes you out of what would otherwise be a really great offensive advantage opportunity.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point there. I think we're kind of going through similar situations. I think we have some girls who are outstanding shooters, and we're trying to get them to shoot more.
Yeah.
Like, we're trying to tell them, analytically, and I don't, I think analytics are important at the high school level. It's not going to be at the level of the college or the program, but we're trying to get certain girls to understand, like, hey, when you're taking a shot, it's generating over 1 point per possession per shot. So, like, you need to shoot it more. Like, there should be no looks that you're passing up on. You can almost explain, hey, you passing up a shot is actually leading to less efficient offense
Yep.
from us. So it's almost like, kind of using numbers to show them why they should be aggressive or hunting those shots from their effective area.
Yeah, it was funny. I was kind of joking with one of my girls about, the fact that she, will put up a lot of shots in practice and do a lot of game-like shots from certain areas in particular that are just really strong suits of her, and then in a game she'll get it in that exact same spot, but then she'll look to pass out, or she'll wait on it.
Right.
I'm like, what are we putting all this work in? What are you putting all this work in for? It's just
Right.
not take advantage of it in a game, but I think for some players it's realizing like, oh, like, yeah, like this is what I should be doing. Like I should be confident in that. And I think as coaches, I had to learn, and I am learning with this one particular girl who I'm thinking about right now, that part of my job as a coach is to make sure that I'm instilling that confidence in her. And I think that that's something also for coaches to realize, is that some of your players are really, really like skittish about shooting, and they're really, really skittish about missing, or they think they're going to let the team down if they don't hit every single free that they shoot, and being able to explain like, no, like percentage wise, you certainly are not expected to make every single free, but you're going to shoot X amount of threes. I think percentage wise is how many you're going to make, but you have to take advantage of it when that situation presents itself. And that's something I think I've learned over the past couple of years is I've realized I've had players who feel that if they don't make every single one of their shots, that it was a bad shot. And making sure to explain that that's not the case has been, I think, pretty crucial for at least a couple of my players.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you bring up a great point where sometimes the actual act of the shot is, I don't want to say it's more important than whether it goes in, but showing that you can shoot the shot and doing it opens up things for other players. So if you're going to take that shot and show that you're capable of making it, and taking it consistently, all of a sudden, hey, they can't double down in the post as much, or they can't
Yep.
help off of certain players. So I think sometimes showing that you can showing that you can shoot that shot is really important. Regardless of whether everyone goes in, it's just the act of doing it keeps defenses honest.
100%. Coach, one more question here before we hit our concluding segment. That's been great. This hour is just kind of flown right by, which is awesome. But I wanted to ask you before we hit this concluding segment about what are you kind of looking at as a coach who's always growing, always evolving, always learning? What do you kind of see as kind of your next steps personally as a coach, as you try to think about where you want to go offensively and things that you're looking to do offensively? What do you kind of look at as the future for this coming season and maybe beyond, as things that you're looking to implement, add, or kind of refine from an offensive standpoint?
Yeah, I think you're always, I'm sure you would agree, in the process of trying to become a better coach, no matter how
Hmm.
much success you've had. I heard a Rick Pitino quote the other day where, he talks about the second you stop learning is the second you should stop coaching. So, I really try to take that mindset. I think, from our perspective, I try to pick two or three offenses that have similar pieces to us, and to study them and to take things from them and how they play that we can incorporate, into what we do. I take one for example is the Yukon men, and I know it's obviously different across boys to girls, but some of the layering of the sets that they did and the way they get Donovan Kling their true five moving on the perimeter is something that I definitely think we could take things from. And I will take and look at examples from everyone. I think Corey Close, for everyone listening, the head coach at UCLA women, does a fantastic job. She will tweet out, about once a week or twice a week, just some motion like spacing templates that they're working on in practice that are always extremely insightful. I'll see them and think, I think this is really something that we could work on in practice, or the way they cut without the ball is something that we can take. So I'm always trying to find, to study the best and just take little things from them that we can incorporate into our offense. So that's kind of the point that I am now. We're just been watching some film on teams that do things with similar pieces to us and how they have success and how we can incorporate them into what we do.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's great. Find what it is that you're trying to run, and what you're trying to get to offensively, and see how it's being run in other programs and other levels. Take things that works, maybe don't use the things that don't. I've been in those
Right.
situations where I pull from different programs or things that I like and things that I can do and things that I'm like, oh, well, if I can't, I don't know if I have the athletes or the players to kind of run that, but I like it conceptually and I'll keep it in the back burner sort of thing. So no, I love that. I love that quote too, because lifelong learning and coaching, right? Once you once you think you know everything, time to get out, right? That's kind of what you just said.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Coach, to wrap up, there's a couple questions I ask every guest, and I'll start with this first one. And I know there's a lot that you can share here, but thinking back on your coaching career, what is a specific moment from your coaching career that you think by sharing our listeners would be able to learn from?
Yeah, I think one thing that I found, and there's a specific moment, is the value of having a play card or almost like a cheat sheet that I keep with me for every game. And my assistants joke that it can turn into like a scroll with how much is written on it. But we played a team last year early in the season. It was early in my tenure here, and they played a defense that we were not anticipating at all. It was early in the season on film. They hadn't shown this. We didn't really have an indication. We were new to the program, so I didn't know this program very well at the time. And that they played a zone, the type of defense that we were not prepared for. And of course, we drew up a few ideas on the board, and we tried to in game. I'm talking about a few ideas or things we could go to. We did not play well that game. We did not have success. And one thing I've learned and that I take is, I just have a note card or, a sheet of paper with me, and I will have some ideas or actions or things we can turn to for every type of defense. And I carry it with me all the time because you just never know, whether you're going to see 1-3-1 or a box in one, just so we can have something to turn to that we've worked on and installed, so we don't get to that point where it's like, man, we weren't prepared for this. And I think that was an important lesson and something that I found to be very, very beneficial, is just having that almost little cheat sheet to have you prepared for all types of different defenses that you can see. And I think that's something that all coaches could take that could be valuable.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about those situations because I think that's great about, things get frantic during a game, or your mind starts going 100 miles an hour, and things that you think you're going to remember in the pregame you forget about or neglect. And so to have that there is kind of almost something to remind you, ground you a little bit, and be like, oh yeah, kind of mentally, get you back on track if there was something you may have forgotten about or need to do is super helpful. I think that as a coach, I've many times thought that there would be something I would remember later, but then during the heat of everything and as the game's going on, things kind of slip my mind. And so luckily I got assistance, and luckily I, like you, that little cheat sheet or something you put out on your board there. Oh yeah, cool little thing to reference and kind of get you like, oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, let's put that in, or let's run that real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you can even write little tendencies like, hey, if we run, pick and roll or Spain action,
Hmm.
like this is how we think it's going to be defended. So just little things like that you can turn to. I've just found that to be very helpful.
Yeah, it's like you're almost like your own like assistant coach there with the little notes that you have ready to go. You
Yeah,
have like
by
your
the end
own
of the
like
season,
stuff to look at.
it can get pretty long by the end of the season. That's for the coaches
Uh,
joke, but no, I definitely think it's beneficial.
Awesome. Coach, to wrap up, I give every guest what I kind of call a 60-second soapbox. You can go over 60 seconds though, because I'm not going to time you. It's just a catchy title that I like to put to it. But it's your platform to kind of get out a final thought, a final message, kind of a closing idea to leave the listeners with. You can take it anywhere, basketball, coaching, otherwise related that you want. After all, it is your soapbox. So, Coach, I'm going to go ahead and give you the floor here and let you take it from here.
Yeah, I think my topic today is just really on the importance of the mental side of basketball and in girls basketball and really basketball in general. I think I was listening to a podcast. I believe Corey Close was on Basketball Immersion. We talked about earlier, but the head coach of UCLA women, and she talked about how much time that everyone spends in practice and individual workouts, really working on the physical side of basketball. And that even off the court as far as workouts and getting stronger and working on your skills and stuff. But how much time do you really spend as a coach and a coaching staff working on the mental side of basketball? And I really stopped and thought about that question for a second. And, my immediate answer was not enough. If you think about how important the mental side of basketball really is, I think incorporating mental training and work. And hey, as high school coaches, we do not have the resources where we're going to have a licensed psychologist on staff, or as a sports psychologist who's going to be able to work with the girls on a daily basis, or a counselor that with the team that they can turn to. But I think really spending time with your players, working on the mental part of the game, building up their confidence, learning to move on quickly from mistakes, getting them in the right headspace before they play games. I think that stuff is so important, and I think it's generally very overlooked in girls basketball. I think this is something that we're going to spend a lot more time on, as we get into the fall, is really working on the mental side of basketball. But I think her question, when she really challenges you as a coach to think about how much time you spend on it, I would just urge all listeners to really think about that. How much time are you really spending with your team working on the mental side of basketball? And what can you do better to help your team be more prepared for next season from a mental standpoint? Because, I'm sure everyone spends time on working on their skills and working on the weight room and getting stronger and quicker and faster. But how much time are you spending improving the mental side of the game, which we know is important, but maybe we still don't devote enough time to it or as much as we should. So I think the mental side of basketball is my soapbox for the day. And just what can you do as a coach to improve your program from a mental standpoint?
I love that. I think that's such a easy thing to lose sight of when we think about all the basketball and all the coaching stuff that we're trying to put in, and we're trying to push, go, 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 that making sure that we're intentional, as you kind of brought up about making sure that our players are doing well mentally, checking in on how they're doing mentally, making sure that we're there as somebody that they can kind of come to and talk to and feel open with. All those things are super important, and the more mentally healthy and emotionally healthy your team is, I think also the bigger strides you're going to make as a basketball program as well. So that's really great. I love that you brought that up, that mental health aspect. Coach, I really want to thank you for coming on here and talking about a lot of great things. Girls basketball, mental health. Obviously, we talked a lot about offense and offensive advantages as well. Really cool to pick your brain and hear your thoughts on everything, and I'm really excited for you to kind of get right into this upcoming season with of all the pieces that you have returning and all the things that you're building on and keeping on doing. So, Coach Limberiou, really appreciate you coming on, sharing some insights with us, and go get it next year. Hopefully, it's a great productive season and it brings a lot of success on and off the court for you, Coach. Really do appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on and for all you do to grow the game of basketball through the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you guys so much for listening. This was another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. We will see you guys next time.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Make sure to connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you next time.